Hey everyone, you're listening to the Simple Electronics Podcast. I'm your host, Dan, from the Simple Electronics YouTube channel. And this episode is brought to you by PCBWay, but more about that later because right now I've got with me a very special guest, Gabe from the Save It for Parts YouTube channel. How are you, Gabe?
I'm pretty well, thank you, Dan.
Well, I actually heard of your channel from Pile of Stuff, who is another YouTuber and friend of the show. But for those that don't know you, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and what your YouTube channel is all about?
Sure. My name's Gabe, or Save It for Parts, and that handle comes from when I was a child. I would not let my parents throw away any of my broken toys. I'd yell out, "No, no, save it for parts," and I would take my broken toys and make terrible Frankenstein creations out of them. And the YouTube channel kind of evolved out of that. I tend to save things, hoard things, take broken stuff and make other stuff out of it. And since I am a bit of a hoarder, the YouTube channel is partly a excuse to do something with that stuff, to not just have it clutter up my house and garage. A little bit more background. I grew up in Alaska on an island actually outside of Juneau, and so we had a background of repurposing things as needed, as not throwing things away if we absolutely didn't have to. And so that's a little bit of where that saving and repurposing and duct taping things together has come from.
I would have no idea what that's all about. My house is completely spotless and has no junk inside, of course.
Oh, of course.
um, I think you sold yourself a little short, but that's okay because most makers that come on here don't think of themselves as highly as their audience does. So let me just sort of explain what my first introduction to your channel was, and then maybe it'll be a little bit clearer to the audience why I think that you're a fantastic guest to have on the podcast. And so Pile of Stuff linked a video about Gabe building a canoe. And now building is a little bit of a tight word here because the canoe he already had, but the back end was completely destroyed to the point where nobody would pay anybody $10 for something like this. But Gabe not only fixed it, but he installed a Weedwhacker motor with a propeller, and he made himself a gasoline-powered canoe. Can you talk to us a little bit about that project, how you got the idea, and what's it all about?
Sure. It was actually worse than not being able to find somebody to buy it. Somebody actually dumped that in the parking lot at work, so that was actually illegally dumped canoe, and had the rear end destroyed. And it was one of those things I had just said to myself, well, I've got so many boats in the yard, I don't need any more boat projects. And then here's this free canoe, basically, that should probably go in the dumpster, but I can't stand to throw most of a boat in the dumpster, so I took that home. And I had a little bit of experience with fiberglassing, so I was able to fix the stern and put some seats in it, patch up the holes, and then along the way I said, well, I've got this old Weedwhacker, and I've got some little trolling motor props, and everything kind of came together, I guess, naturally to some extent. And it never went very fast. It was never very efficient, but it was kind of a fun project to make a motorized canoe out of just trash that I had lying around.
Yeah, and you often in your videos, or at least the ones I've seen, you talk about sort of, redneck X or trash Y or whatever. But I mean, you do work to a certain level of precision. I didn't know a single redneck who had access to a drill press, but you made yourself like an adapter and put the prop right on the end of the weed whacker shaft, right?
I did, and I would say it's a little bit redneck still. I'm not skilled to a high extent with the drill press. I think I had a friend over once, and he asked, "Well, where's your lathe?" And I looked at him like, "Oh, I've got I don't have one of those." So um, I'd say I have a mixed bag of skills. Growing up in Alaska, we didn't always have the money or the space or the resources for a lot of equipment, so we had to kind of learn how to make do with what we had. And nowadays, I have a little more space and a little more money, but I still I find it more convenient sometimes to just do something in a way that I'm familiar with. It may not necessarily be the right way or the professional way, but it tends to work if I put enough effort into it.
How fast did you end up going with that canoe? Because the video, it didn't look like the Weedwhacker had a lot of horsepower, let's just say.
You're right, it didn't. And a few miles an hour, essentially. The prop size was probably wrong. The pitch of the prop was wrong. So if I had put a little more engineering into it, if I had been able to find or I didn't have any 3D printers at the time. If I had been able to maybe 3D print some kind of prop, a few of my commenters said, "Hey, use an RC boat prop because the RPM of the Weed Whip is designed to go through air. It's designed to be efficient at a really high speed, where I'm trying to go at essentially a lower speed with the prop." So there were a lot of inefficiencies in the system.
But here's the difference between you and I, though, because if I had to do the same project, let's say I had a canoe dropped from the heavens, or probably more like the back of a pickup truck into a parking lot, um, I would then fuss for months over how to attach a prop to a weed whacker and do mathematical calculations to try to figure out the perfect amount of blades and the pitch of the prop blades. And then I would 3D print it, and I would try a couple different materials. I would adjust the hub, and then I'd have to like bend the shaft of the weed whacker to get it at the right angle. And in the end, this would be that same exact canoe in that same exact shape as you found it, sitting in my backyard for 3 years. The point is, it wouldn't get done. And so I really appreciate the fact that you just got it done, and you probably had fun making it and trying it. Am I right?
I did, yeah. I definitely had some frustration along the way, but that's kind of part of making anything. And I've heard a saying, I forget where it's from, but there's a saying that perfect is the enemy of finished. And so that's kind of how I treat things. Is I don't have to necessarily make it perfect, but I'd like to get to a stopping point. I don't like to leave things half done in the garage or the backyard. It really bugs me until it's either finished or torn apart for something else, or maybe if I give up completely, sometimes I'll give it away or I'll sell it. But I do have a bit of ADHD. If I spend too long on a project, I tend to lose interest in it, or I get bogged down in details. So it really helps me to get to certain stopping points or to get to milestones without worrying too much about how perfect it is, as long as it's working well enough for my goals.
And that's 100% a lesson that I need to take on board, because I've been working on building a custom 3D printer here, and I'm just seeing it. It's over to my left, and honestly, it's just a shell at the moment. It has the XY mechanism pretty much figured out, but that at this point where it is now, it's a couple hundred hours of CAD work and 3D printing. And
Sure.
so I really should have stopped a while ago to just get like a working concept and then make a video explaining what I'm doing, instead of me going, every once in a while in the podcast say, yep, 3D printer is still here, still being worked on. It just takes a lot of time. So yeah, I really appreciate that mentality that, you need to at some point stop and go, hey, this is what I'm making and this is what it can do now. And if I need it to do more, then we'll just add more. Like it's not a big deal, but mentally it sticks in my mind all the time that I get that bug where it's like, no, it's going to be wrong or whatever. So yeah, I really need to take lessons from your channel for sure.
Well, and I wouldn't say I get everything done on a timeline either. I do tend to jump around a little bit. So while I intend to finish most of my projects, I do switch between them sometimes. I'll have to set something aside while I wait to. I might have to order something from online, or I might have to figure out where do I source a particular piece, or sometimes I just have to think about it. I have to switch to some other project and say, well, hey, now I got to go work on this and come back to this other thing. So it's a mixture. While I do tend to try to get to a stopping point, it's not necessarily a one linear journey, I guess.
For sure. Um, I'm seeing a little bit of a theme in your channel, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like you have a little bit of a fixation for things you can ride on or in. Does that make sense?
Possibly. Definitely boats and watercraft. Since I grew up on an island, we used boats a lot. We didn't have a family car. We had a family boat. So um, actually several boats. And then I owned a 24-foot sailboat for a while up in Alaska. Ended up selling that. And that was one that I got for free and fixed up. Uh, I don't have the space for anything quite that big here, and I have a fairly small car. So if I can build vehicles that are easy to transport, easy for one or two people to ride on, that's what I mostly focus on here. Rail vehicles as well. I've always been into railroads. We've got some abandoned railroads around here, which, as my some of my YouTube commenters will say, there's no such thing as an abandoned railroad, and even if there's trees growing through the tracks, you're definitely going to get run over. So I have to say, don't do this at home. But I've got a couple little vehicles that I take out on abandoned railways and ride those around.
Yeah, I think was there one video where you even showed that the rails were disconnected somewhere? I think I saw that. Maybe
Right. Yeah.
misremember.
There's one. Well, there's a couple tracks. There's one actually about 2 blocks from my house in a park, which is just a few hundred feet of track that was left behind when they made it into a city park. And that one's always entertaining because people will be down there walking their dogs and they'll see me go by on some ridiculous thing made out of garbage. The other track that we use a lot is, yeah, it's disconnected from the main line. There's a burned section of trestle. There's parts that are paved over, so it's completely impossible for a train to get through there. And yet still, I think I trigger some rail fans when I do anything other than looking at it. So
Yeah, yeah. That's. I mean, it's true, but to a point. I mean, there are people that are convinced that the tracks are abandoned and they walk on it and turns out it's a regular commuter
sure, yeah,
way. Like I'm that's not what you're doing, but I understand their mentality that if you make something idiot proof, the world makes you a better idiot.
oh yeah,
So I'm sure you're fine, but yeah, I think it's a little bit dangerous advice for people to take. um I'm just looking on your channel and I'm finding it absolutely hilarious. You made a boat out of a sandbox boat.
yeah. That was another one that I had seen a few other people do that. The Tuggy Little Tykes Tuggy Sandbox, which looks like a boat, and um, other people have done that. I have a friend over in the UK who is obsessed with them. He had a lot of trouble finding one in the UK because they're an American product, but I found one here and made it into a boat. Put a little trolling motor on it. Actually, put quite a bit more flotation on it, and tried to make it basically completely Coast Guard legal. I had navigation lights, I had a horn, I had an emergency paddle, and tried to register it. And we've had really good luck in the past registering stupid things. I've made rafts out of barrels. We've made the homemade canoe. We've made all kinds of boats out of garbage. This one was a little too much for the DNR. They said, again, similar to the railroad thing, they said, well, if we let you do it, then every idiot's going to want to do this, and we're going to have to be rescuing these sandboxes left and right on the rivers and the lakes. So they would not let me register that as a watercraft. Right now, I'm thinking of, I still have it. I'm thinking of making it radio controlled and calling it a toy. So if nobody's riding on it, I can maybe just drive it around, and I think that's legal. I don't think anybody would be upset with that, but we'll have to see what happens with that in a future video.
That's actually hilarious. So for those of you listening along at home, I can't explain to you what Gabe looks like riding on this thing. Just imagine a fully grown man in a captain's hat, in a PW, like a life vest with a nice thick bushy chin strap beard, just smiling ear to ear in this little kid's sandbox floating on. Was that a lake or a river, something like that? Just
Yeah, that was a lake, and yeah, it's ridiculous. Just hilarious to ride around on it and watch all the other boaters do double takes and triple takes.
I love how you even screwed in some cleats, some docking cleats.
Oh yeah, I wanted to be able to tow things with it. It's a tugboat, so I thought if it works well enough, maybe I can tow a kayak or tow something else around.
That's actually hilarious. So I've gone I've done about 1/100th of what you did there, because I was at the a charity shop here, and I found a sandbox boat, but not a boat that is a sandbox, but a boat for sandbox playing, and
Oh,
just a flat bottom toy basically to play in a sandbox with. And I added a brushless motor, remote control stuff, and made it into a RC speedboat. So I
oh, nice.
I feel like we're compadres.
Yeah, it's fun. Like I said, I find things like this, and I try to think of what can I do with it. What's my excuse for bringing it home? And sometimes it's a pretty flimsy excuse, and it ends up on the roof of the car, or it ends up getting dragged home, whether or not I have a plan for it. So, which I have some boats I need to get rid of at the moment or give away, but that's another story.
So if you're selling boats, then if anyone is around your state, can they hit you up in the comments section to buy them?
Yeah, I can't guarantee that they're good boats or pretty boats, but I definitely have a couple on the pile in the backyard, and I think the snow has gone away enough that I can get those extracted. We had quite a bit of snow here this year, so it's finally starting to go away. We're finally getting some spring weather.
Yeah, our snow just left. So last week, let me do the conversion here for everyone in the States. But it was 30 degrees Celsius, so 86 Fahrenheit last week. And so people still had snow piled on their lawns, and we were walking around the neighborhood and it was 86 Fahrenheit outside. So it's crazy.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about at least one more boat. You have converted a tiny little aluminum boat into an airboat. Can you talk to us about that project, please?
Sure. That was one that I did a few years before I really started doing the YouTube channel or documenting everything in my project. A friend of mine had one of those powered paragliders, kind of the fan that you strap on your back for flying around with a parachute, and it needed some work. He wasn't doing that hobby anymore, and he ended up just giving it to me. So I said, well, it seems like a lot of work to make this into a plane. I'm not really at a point in my life where I want to fly around, so I'll make it into a boat. And that was when I actually bought the boat. I couldn't find one on Craigslist, so I went on Craigslist and I posted, looking for a flat bottom boat about 12 feet, and suddenly a bunch of people remembered, oh yeah, my dad has one that he doesn't use, or my husband has one that he never uses it. So I ended up with all these people offering me these boats, and anyway, long story short, got one of the boats, brought it home, dug all the mice out of it because it had been sitting in someone's yard forever, bolted this fan, this paraglider motor onto the back, got the motor all fixed up, and did some extra kind of unnecessary things. The fan folds down for transport. The boat has wheels that can be kind of clipped onto it so I can ride it on land. And yeah, it's an ongoing project. I do take it out a few times a year, but right now it's just buried under a bunch of stuff in the garage because it needs some more work. It's works pretty well with one person. It gets up on plane. It's actually really scary. I don't like to go full throttle because it wants to fly. It's an aircraft engine. But with two people, it's very reasonable. It does really well on ice, on snow, on water, and kind of on land. The wheels are another work in progress, though.
Let me so I have that exact same boat. I have access to it. My dad owns one that he got with his cottage in the 60s. So who knows how old that thing is, but I am, let's say, a portly gentleman. I'm about 200 and I've lost some weight, so I'm about 205 pounds. And just me in that boat is, I mean, it sits quite a bit lower than without me. Um, doesn't this thing, isn't it terrifying? Like having two people in that thing with a giant motor strapped on the back? Because I mean, that stuff ain't light, right?
It's the motor is surprisingly light. I'm a similar weight to you, and my partner is much smaller, so she balances things out a little bit in the bow. But yeah, the motor itself is not actually that. It's designed to fly. It's designed to basically be worn as a backpack, so it can't be too heavy. And it's a rotary engine, so it's surprisingly high power to weight ratio. I believe it's about 30 horsepower. But yes, for some reason it all kind of goes together, and I definitely don't take it out on any kind of rough weather. I don't take it anywhere on a large body of water. And I'm not 100% sure what would happen if we did flip it on water. I don't know if it has enough flotation in it to stay above the water surface, or if we'd never see it again. I did replace all the closed cell foam in the seats, and sometimes I'll tie an empty gas jug or some buoys to it just in case. But knock on wood, we haven't flipped it on water yet. I have flipped it on ice, did some damage to the propeller a little bit, but yeah, again, knock on wood, we haven't had any major accidents with it.
Yeah, I was about to say because it seems to go pretty fast on snow and ice. I mean, do you even have decent steering on snow and ice? Because I'm assuming a lot of the steering is being done by when the boat sort of tilts and then the corner gets some some purchase in the water. How is it on snow and ice?
It drifts. It basically just spins if you're not careful. So it is a flat bottom boat. There aren't really a lot of people have said I should put runners or chines or something on the bottom to help dig into ice and snow. Um, it's not really designed as an airboat. Most airboats have a slightly different hull design. This is just a duck boat that you're supposed to row around or put a 3 horsepower motor on for duck hunting. So I'm definitely using it in a non manufacturer recommended way. And yeah, when we're on ice and snow, if I turn too sharply, the steering is all with a big fin on the back, a big air rudder. And so if I turn that rudder too sharply, it'll just spin in place. It'll do 360s.
That's actually hilarious. I think it was Adam Savage from the Mythbusters. I'm constantly quoting him, but I think he
Sure.
said this from a hovercraft. He says someone told him when learning how to ride a hovercraft that if there's an obstacle in the wide open field, you're guaranteed to hit it. And I feel like it's going to be a bit like that with your airboat on ice.
Yeah, that sounds that sounds pretty accurate. We've been watching some old MythBusters episodes recently, but um, yeah, it's when it goes straight, it keeps going the way it wants to go, and if there's any wind, that doesn't help either. It's a little better on water because it does dig in a little bit, like you said, and it steers and handles a little bit better on water. Land is still kind of an issue. I've gone back and forth with having how many of those wheels are free spinning or free turning like a caster versus how many are fixed, and how does that affect the steering. But yeah, we haven't done a whole lot with it on land. I'm still working out bugs in that wheel system.
Yeah, I would assume something like that would be a sort of a given to use bicycle wheels, but you used like really small, like I don't know. I actually don't know where they're from. What kind of wheels did you put on it?
I've tried a few different ones. I've tried they're kind of an industrial cart wheel, so there's something you'd put on like a wheelbarrow or like something to move equipment around in a warehouse. I've tried some balloon tires that actually came with one of the paramotor rigs that somebody had that are for. You've got the paramotor fan on your back, but then there's like a size up that's like a little tricycle, and then the motor clamps onto that. So I had some wheels like that, and those were far too small for the weight of the boat. Um, yeah, bicycle wheels I have not tried. I think they'd be too flimsy, so I had to go with something that would hold a little more weight of myself plus the boat plus the motor.
Yeah, that's true. It does add up pretty quickly. Do you have a day job to support all this, or is this slowly becoming your day job?
Well, it'd be fun if it would become a day job, but I do work. Yeah, I've got I work for a property management company, a pretty small company locally here, but yeah, I end up spending all my free time on the YouTube channel, and but I do have a job that helps support real life.
Yeah, because I can see I mean, you've built a lot of cool stuff. I'm just wondering where you're getting the time.
Well, I definitely neglect a lot of other projects. I've owned my house for about a decade now, and I think we've done essentially nothing to the house in a traditional sense. I've thrown antennas on the roof. We've cut some holes in the wall for like cat doors and things, but I don't think we've painted a single wall in 10 years. We haven't done any remodeling really. We've talked about doing all kinds of remodeling stuff, but then we just never get around to it. So it's there's other things that normal people might be doing with their time that I just don't get around to.
I completely feel you. We bought in 2012, and oh god, now it's 2023, and we haven't done anything to the house. Not that we don't have to, because it's getting there to the point where we need to.
Sure.
Need to do some like painting the garage door and restaining some wood and interior work as well. But yeah, we've been avoiding that too. So you're not the only one, except I don't have any cool airboats to show for it. So there.
Well, you've got plenty of, I've looked through some of your projects, and I definitely appreciate your electronics knowledge. That's something I uh, am not as knowledgeable in the electronics field. I've played around with some Raspberry Pis, but I would not be able to solder resistors together or get anything to work like that.
Oh, I'm sure with a tiny little bit of effort you'd be able to. But tell us a little bit about what you've done with Raspberry Pis and Arduino, because I can see that at least of a cursory glance of your channel, you've made a DIY um, air quality measuring thing. I've seen that you've done some Wi-Fi detection things. What kind of stuff have you done?
Sure. I actually don't have any experience with Arduino. I have a few. Our local surplus store, Axeman, keeps having these Arduinos really cheap, and I keep picking them up and throwing them in a box, and I don't know what to do with them. But I mostly have been working with Raspberry Pi for any of my small gadgets. The air quality meter, I'm kind of calling it a pi quarter, tricorder. It's not a tricorder form factor, but it's intended as a handheld portable science instrument. So I've done a thermal camera on it. I've done RTL SDR for listening to radio signals, a couple air quality, gas measurements, particulate matter sensors, and yeah, it's kind of fun. I'm learning slowly how things like I2C and serial bus and USB and all that stuff works on a level where I can add in sensors, and I've been trying to learn some Python code. I actually went to school for computer science, and back when I went to college, everything was C++, which doesn't seem like people use that as much anymore now. Now it's all Python, and so I'm trying to learn how to do things with Python for projects like that.
Yeah, I keep getting told that Python is very simple, but very simple for a coding wizard is not the same as very simple for a normie like me. So,
Sure.
yeah, it's a bit much.
Yeah, I started out when I was a kid, it was AppleSoft Basic, and then everybody says, oh, Basic teaches you all the wrong things, and you have to unlearn all that. And I definitely run into that every now and then. I go, where's the go to function? Then I have to slap myself and say, no, you can't do that anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's very true. Like I learned, maybe I'm slightly younger than you, but not by a lot, if so. But I learned Visual Basic code in high school, in high school, elementary probably, and it just did not transfer. It's one of those languages that it was visual, like you drag stuff onto the screen and then you right clicked and you change its properties, and so for me, I really wish I would have learned something more like basic code, which at least would have put me in the right mindset to learn code. Because at the moment, Code and we don't get along at all. We're not friends. I just mash up people's examples together, basically.
Yeah, I do that too. For a lot of my tricorder, picorder stuff, and a lot of my other Raspberry Pi stuff, I just go on GitHub. I grab other people's code. Maybe I'll change one or two things. I actually started writing kind of my own from scratch Python code for that tailgater telescope system that I was doing taking the satellite dish and making it into a microwave imager. And I got in over my head a little bit on GitHub. I took my code. I was really proud of it. I put it on GitHub, and I don't actually understand how GitHub works. I had been using it as a place to just steal code, and I don't actually use Git. I didn't know what a pull request was. I didn't know how repositories worked. And suddenly that video got popular, and people were wanting to work with my code and wanting to do collaborations and pull requests. And I'm sitting here going, I don't know what any of this means. but I'll try to read your code and understand it because I don't know what any of it means. So that's something I'm working on, is trying to now go through some of those refinements that people have suggested to something I wrote, see if I can figure out what it means, see if I can use it with my project, and get a little bit of collaboration in that regards.
Oh, I am so with you. You have no idea. That's what I've been using GitHub for too, is just storing my code and letting people use it. But then I got a notification that somebody had forked my code, and I was like, trust me, I can fork my own code. Um, but then I asked around, and it just means that people made changes to my code. So I was like, wait, what? Someone liked my code enough to like use it in their thing and then modified it? Like I was I was actually excited because I don't know what GitHub really does. Like I have a broad idea, but only broad ideas. And I even got berated in my comment section. They're like, how can you code and not know what GitHub is? And it's like, I just look, I just don't.
Right, yeah.
I just don't.
And then, meanwhile, half of my comments section, when I post anything about code, everybody says, "Oh, why aren't you using ChatGPT? Why not just have the AI write it?" And I'm going, "Well, I'd like to actually learn what I'm doing. I don't want to just have a chatbot do it for me." So there's definitely different extremes when it comes to coding.
I'm actually afraid of using ChatGPT for code because the issue is that if it doesn't do what I want it to do quite right, I don't have the knowledge to modify the code it spat out. I need to kind of write it from scratch, or else I don't. I'm kind of stuck.
Right. Yeah, that's the same with me. I have to understand it to really be able to work with it.
So I am embarking pretty soon because the good time is coming. The good weather is coming. I'm embarking in a Gabe style video where I'm going to be building just a super simple raft, right? And this is if my tax agent is listening, just block your ears for a moment here. But this is a cunning way to get to get my storage supplies deducted from my YouTube income. So my plan, and I'd like you to hear it out and let me know what you think. But my plan is to buy a bunch of 2x3 because 2x4s are more expensive, a little bit of plywood, and then Home Depot has these like really strong storage boxes that you're supposed to be able to stack one on top of each other. But they have holes all around the lid, which is meant for you to run like a zip tie through it to hold the lid shut. But my plan is to buy, let's say, 8 of those and the 2x4s and all that stuff, head out to my parents' cottage, lay it out, build it up as a raft using the totes, the plastic totes as floats, and then popping a couple of 12-volt batteries and a trolling motor on that. And if I'm feeling ambitious, making a little canopy and putting some solar panels and a charge controller. What do you think of that kind of project? Just a quick interruption to talk about this episode's sponsor, PCBWay. PCBWay has been a long-term sponsor of the channel, and I think they're a good match for my channel because they provide quality PCBs for a reasonable price. You can get boards manufactured up to 100 mils by 100 mils for just $5, including shipping to Canada, $15 US, including shipping to USA, $12 US, which is incredibly cheap for professionally manufactured PCBs. I can personally attest to the quality of these PCBs, and so if you want a circuit immortalized forever, check out PCBWay.com with the link in the description. Now back to the conversation.
Yeah, that sounds like something I would do for sure. I guess my experience building rafts, building boats, there's always a gotcha somewhere along the way. A lot of times it's the size, so sometimes it ends up being too difficult to transport or too large to fit on a trailer. When we did a 8x16 raft, and we had to split it into 2 pieces so that it could be stacked and transported on the road, and then each piece could be taken off by hand with just a few people, reassembled and floated. So there's a lot of considerations like that when it comes to building it versus actually moving it versus is your motor powerful enough to move it? Is your hull design going to cause too much drag? When we're we do a lot of boating on the Mississippi River, and so we have to take into account not only river current pushing on the hull, but wind currents pushing on the superstructure versus how are those fighting against the motor or other power source. So there's a surprising amount of thought that goes into some of these simple rafts, but a lot of it is a learning process. You don't always know that right off the bat until you actually get in the water and see what it does.
Oh, for sure. I'm definitely only doing this on a lake because the terrifying part about a river is it flows. So
Right.
if you end up dead in the water, 20 minutes can mean several miles
Yep.
in some cases. And in fact, when I do plan on bringing, I have a little aluminum boat, 12-footer. When I plan on fishing with it here in Ottawa, we have the Ottawa River. Until I can trust that my Evinrude from the '60s is reliable, I'm going to be fishing upriver from the boat launch,
Sure.
not downriver, because at that point it's going to be a lot safer to float back to the boat launch instead of because I mean that river, the Ottawa River, flows into the St. Lawrence, and so a couple days worth of movement and you're in the Atlantic Ocean. So no
Right.
thanks.
Yeah, I always try to have some kind of a backup for any critical system on a boat, even just for poking around on the rivers here. Some of our rivers go to dams, some of them go to locks. There's barge traffic, so you don't want to be dead in the water. So yeah, I'm like you. I have a series of old 50s and 60s outboards. They work probably 90% of the time, but that 10% when they fail is always going to be at the worst time, it seems like. So it's nice to have at least oars, if not a trolling motor, an anchor so you can stop yourself if you have to, PFDs, of course, extra fuel, tools. Yeah, it's a wonder any of my boats float with all the extra equipment that I bring along, but I do like to have backups for anything that I expect to fail or that I wouldn't want to fail at the worst time.
You tend to make your stuff out of stuff that you got for free or cheap. Have you had any like catastrophic failures while trying to film a video?
Um, Boy, I'm trying to think. I've definitely crashed some things.
I
I
mean, that's
had,
just good video making.
oh, as far as what do you mean?
I mean, if you crash things, that's just for entertainment purpose. That wasn't an accident at all, right? Wink, wink.
Oh, yes, yes, of course. I meant to do that. um, yeah, I mean, I've definitely had things fail, either because I built it poorly or because it was something I got out of the trash. Yeah, I've found myself drifting on the river with an old outboard, and I've had to. I think actually not the Coast Guard, the sheriff showed up for that one, but fortunately they showed up after I'd gotten the motor running and had gotten back to my starting point, so we could tell them, oh, it's fine, go rescue somebody else. I think I got in the police blotter of some small town for that, but it was more because of I had this ridiculous polka dot boat at the time, and I think that was entertaining. but um, yeah, I'm trying to think if I've really failed. I've definitely had things that catch on fire. I've had electronics catch on fire because the voltage was wrong or I shorted it out. I had a little steam engine I was trying to make that was probably on fire more than it wasn't. Um, yeah, I don't know. I'm having a hard time coming up with something really crazy.
That's actually a really good sign. That just speaks to your craftsmanship or your luck. I mean, one or the other, maybe both.
Oh, both, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Did I see this right? You bought a DNA sequencer?
I did. I've actually I ended up trading that away to somebody for some solar panels, which might go on a boat. But to go loop back to the start, it was a. I sit on these online auctions a lot. I go on local online auctions where there'll be a company going out of business or warehouse clearance or something along those lines where there's just weird stuff that doesn't show up anywhere else. And this DNA sequencer showed up, and I thought, well, I have no knowledge of that. I don't know what to do with it, but I'll throw a low bid at it, and it sounds cool. And gosh, I won it. So I think I threw in $100 bid. I got it for $100 and had no idea what to do with it. I got it to fire up. I got the mechanics of it to work. It was essentially a three-axis robotic frame, which did some pneumatic and hydraulic stuff to move around samples, to move around liquids. And that's kind of where my knowledge of it ended. I asked around online, I asked some other YouTubers and makers, and they all kind of said, well, it's cool, but it's so old that science has moved on. You can get a better sequencer for a few $100s, and just the supplies to use this thing are more expensive than the actual device. So it ended up being a little bit of a dead end. It was fun to play with, but I've sold that or traded at this point. So.
Gotcha. You know, do you have an end game for your channel? Like, do you think that at some point you're gonna end up at a point that you're you know, are you building up to something bigger, or are you just having fun, basically?
Well, I guess the dream is to make it bigger, to be. I guess the dream would be to be independent and successful, like some bigger makers out there. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. My stuff is always a little bit, you know, on the smaller side. Bigger projects, I don't know if I have anything really huge in the pipeline. I've got several notebooks full of ideas, and whether or not I'll get around to those ideas anytime soon is kind of dependent on time and materials and space to work in. Yeah, I don't know if I've got anything really crazy. Like, I'm not going to build a massive sailboat from scratch. I'm not going to build anything too crazy. I think our biggest permanent project, I would say, is actually out on a friend's land where we're digging some underground tunnels, and we actually got a secondhand monorail train from the local zoo and stuck it out there. So we're making a bit of a weird adult child playground thing for kids who never grew up, but that's a collaborative effort. That's more people than just me working on that stuff.
Can I just point out how hilarious the sentence, "We got a free monorail from a local zoo"?
we did have to pay for it. I paid $1,000 for the monorail, and then probably 6,000 to move the thing out there, because it was a big full-size enclosed cab. Each car is about the size of an RV, and there were 6 cars, so it was definitely not easy to move it. But yeah, so if I said free, I misspoke. It was definitely a little bit of money, but well worth it, I think, to have our own monorail. Even if it doesn't move, we didn't get any track, because that would be. I think the zoo is turning the track into something else now, but the monorail just sits there. It's a nice little weekend cabin for us, essentially.
You may not have said free. I'm not sure. It may have come from my head, but here's an idea. You have a monorail. You don't have track. Around you, there is track that is abandoned. Putting 2 and 2 together here.
Yeah, I mean, it's 2 track versus 1 track, and I do have I have a smaller version of the monorail that was part of the system from the zoo that's been sitting in my yard cluttering it up, and that could become some kind of a rail vehicle. But yeah, again, it's one of those things that's sort of out in the to-do list zone, but hovering near the bottom at the moment.
I don't even, like, I'm trying to picture, because around here we have tracks. There's some that are in use and some that aren't. But if I wanted to do a project like that, where, you know, let's say I just transported, you know, a monorail car that's been converted to a track car, and then I don't even know who you could call to ask for permission to borrow the tracks for, you know, a couple of weeks to build this project, for example. So it's like, it's so outside the realm of possibility that it gives your videos like that extra bit of charm. I find that I mean, I'm sure you don't have to say if you don't want to, but I'm sure you're just showing up there, plopping your stuff on the tracks, making the video and leaving. But I mean, just the thought of the logistics of finding a track that's abandoned and then using it is, I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, yeah, it's there's a little bit of surrealism, I suppose. I think like I said, I get second and third looks, and I get a lot of confused people when we do some of these things. Even just transporting the full-size monorail from the zoo. We had it, we rented a trailer, we borrowed a truck, we hauled this thing across 2 states, and yeah, we had a lot of strange looks from passersby, and we weren't going very fast, so we were getting a lot of people passing us and just very confusedly staring at us. There are definitely, if you look around, you might be able to find some track that somebody uses for like a heritage railway or a tour railway. I know sort of near me there's a section of track that has a speeder club. These little speeders are these little inspection cars, gasoline powered 2 to 4 people inspection cars that are apparently there's a whole hobby around refurbishing those and finding places to go out and run them. And people have said, hey, why don't you join one of these clubs? Why don't you, contact these people that have their own track? And most of my vehicles are probably not up to the standards of these these clubs. There has to be a certain level of OSHA approval of whatever agency regulates the safety of some of these things. A lot of my equipment is definitely not OSHA approved, is a phrase that I've used in the U.S. We have the Occupational Health and Safety Administration, and I've definitely co-opted them as a bit of a joke, which hopefully I don't get any angry letters from them, but we definitely refer to a lot of our things jokingly as OSHA approved.
Yeah, I mean, so I think we have I think we have a track here. So I'm in one province, but my city borders on another. But so just on the other province, there is I believe there's like a touristy type train that just runs up between Gatineau, which is the sister city to where I live, and Wakefield. It like goes up an old section of track.
Okay.
But even so, like that's still nuts. Have you heard of the YouTuber called Steve Wallace, also known as Camping with Steve?
It's not ringing a bell. I don't know if I've heard of him.
Yeah, no worries. YouTube is a massive spot, but he's another Canadian. He does camping videos and stuff like that, where he'll go urban stealth camping, basically like behind the Home Depot and stuff like that.
Okay.
But he has a property, and he is making himself like a rail system to go around his property, and so he's making it out of fence posts and stuff. And I think his construction will be kind of right up your alley. So I'll link you to his channel so that you can go check it out once he starts building that, because I think it's very Gabe territory, if you don't mind me saying.
Sure. Yeah. No, that sounds great. That's something I've talked about doing. My property isn't really huge here. I've got a bigger lot at my house, but it's not big enough for more than say a garden railroad. But and then out at our my friend's property where we have the monorail parked, it's mostly a steep ravine, so we can't really do much for track out there. We have a little bit of track in the tunnels that we're digging, but that's just for hauling the sand out. We're not really supposed to ride on it. That's not up to even the OSHA standard that we go for.
I'm sorry, did you say steep ravine? Because that means instead of a train track, you can have a roller coaster track.
We could do like a mountain coaster. I don't know if we trust ourselves with that. We did a zip line. That's something I've been injured on. We made a zip line across the ravine, and I may have been scarred from that slightly, and we don't ride that a lot. We still need to adjust that a little bit, but I don't know if we made a mountain coaster or some kind of a roller coaster. I think we'd be pretty terrified to run it. Another friend of mine, kind of segue, once got a entire playground from a fast food restaurant for free, and that is out there in pieces, and we're trying to assemble that. So we're going to have some slides and some tubes to crawl through. It's like a kind of a 2-story playland from a Burger King. So if we ever get around to finishing that, we'll have a playground, but it's not going to be quite as crazy.
I love how just perusing your channel page or your video page on your channel, every single thumbnail looks like clickbait, and then yet it's not clickbait because you actually did get a monorail, you actually did get the playground, you actually are digging tunnels underneath the house. Like, you're just living the YouTube dream. It looks like, at least.
Well, I try to keep them interesting, and I try not to be too clickbaity if I can help it. But I definitely try to do interesting thumbnails from any particular project. And and I'd say there's definitely videos that are more filler. And I'm surprised sometimes which videos get popular and which don't. I've had videos where I think, well, this is going to be popular. Everybody's going to love this. I'm going to make some money this month, and then it gets 100 views. And then I have other videos where I think, oh, this is just filler. It's going to be boring, and I'm the only one that cares about this. And suddenly it's showing up on like Hackaday or something, and I'm going, well, what happened? so I don't understand. I don't think anyone understands the YouTube algorithm, but I definitely don't understand it. I just do my best to make things I'm interested in, and hopefully other people are interested in.
On my channel, the gist of it is, the lower the effort of the video, the more views it gets.
Oh, funny.
Yeah. So, like, for example, I have a video about just charging batteries because I bought a Chinese Makita clone battery, and I don't have a charger for it. I made a video kind of explaining the basics of charging drill batteries, and it is my most viewed video. I think it has half a million views at this point. And stuff that I work really hard on and that I really care about, like how to use a multimeter properly, it gets like 1,000 views. So it's like, oh.
Yeah, it's really interesting how things go up and down on there.
So I've got actually a question that I ask every single guest. Do you mind if I lay it on you?
Sure.
So the question goes, so let's say you get a grant to start the business of your dreams. Now, it doesn't have to be profitable because you are funded by a grant, but it does have to offer either a service or a product. What kind of business would you start?
Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of options with that. Since I have so many interests, and like I said, I'm a little bit ADHD, so my interests go all over the place. One that I've thought about a little bit and never really done anything with, but I've mentioned the tunnel projects. I've done a few videos where we go out and investigate tunnels and caves around the state. We have a lot of sandstone tunnels in this region, and something that I think would be interesting is a business that researches, maps out, surveys tunnels, caves, mines. I know there are some companies that do that, but I think I could maybe combine some of my interests. Like I have a little ROV submarine. We could investigate flooded things. We could do LiDAR stuff. We could do 3D printing to model stuff. And then I like to do research as well. So I like to dig into the history, the maps, the geological record. When I lived up in Alaska, we did a lot of surveying and mapping of abandoned mines. And so it'd be fun to combine all of that into sort of an abandoned mine mapping or cave mapping business, because I'm always surprised when people say, well, I found this cave behind my house and nobody knew it was there, and I kind of think, well, somebody had to know it was there, and somebody has the map, and we could just go in there and figure out where it goes. And I think that would be an interesting service to provide, is to research and survey those.
Yeah, that's a great that'd be a great business, and something that is probably not profitable, and so it would need something like that, right?
Yeah, and there are a lot of again, regulatory issues, probably safety issues, and when I go out and film some of these caves and mines, usually they're things that are open to the public, or there have been some houses for sale recently in Minnesota that have a cave behind them, and nobody knows that cave is there until the house goes up for sale, and so the real estate agent doesn't really know what to do about it. The new buyers don't know, hey, is it safe? What's the history of this? And but a lot of those you can just the sandstone is very stable, at least our type of sandstone that we're digging our own tunnels in it. We're very familiar with the geology and the mechanics of it, and so a lot of these tunnels are perfectly safe. They're perfectly usable as long as there are certain conditions of humidity and mechanical design. But yeah, I think it'd be interesting to combine all that in and have that as a service for people.
Have you seen Brent from Cerro Gordo, his YouTube channel, which I think is called Ghost Town Living? Have you seen any of that?
I have watched one or two of those, and I've been out in that region. I haven't been to Cerro Gordo, but we've gone to an event in the Death Valley region where which is mine exploring and kind of ghost town exploring. So yeah, we've been out in that region, but I've not gone up to that particular mine myself.
So if he extended out an invitation, is that the kind of thing you're interested in, or you're more interested about the sort of like the local mines?
Oh, anything really. I mean, like I said, I grew up in Alaska. I have some plans to get back up there and do some more research and exploration. And yeah, I am interested in mines and tunnels kind of all over the place. Local is definitely preferred for convenience and expense, but yeah, any mines and tunnels, I'm definitely interested in.
Yeah, that's some really cool stuff. I'm glad you're interested in mines because they terrify the bejesus out of me. So different strokes for different folks. I'm
Oh
glad
yeah,
it's
not
not
for
me.
everyone.
You alluded earlier to having a partner. Now, I think I've seen her in one of your videos. Is that would that be your partner?
Yeah, yeah. She doesn't like to be on camera too much, but every now and then she's on there, and she does help out with a lot of my projects.
What does she think of your projects?
I think she's fairly amused by most of them. Her her interests are a little bit overlapping, a little bit different. She definitely is more uh, detail oriented. She's a lot more careful with her projects than I am. So we definitely have some places where we can collaborate and each bring something to a project.
Isn't it great to have a partner that is supportive of your hobby? I keep reading like on Reddit and stuff, people who they're kind of at odds with their partner. Their partner doesn't approve of their you know either hoarding of stuff or reusing of stuff. And I've never had that issue. My partner is fantastic, and so I think it's pretty good. And I'm glad that yours is as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's great, and we both definitely have some hoarding tendencies. So that's it can be a problem, but it can also be a benefit if we're trying to work on a project together.
Oh, me, it's all me. My wife is just supportive.
That's
She's not.
great.
She doesn't participate.
That's good though. It's good to have support, and it's yeah, that's really important.
And so I guess, geez, the hour flew by very quickly. But is there anywhere that you'd like to direct the listeners of the podcast? Like, where can they find you?
Sure. Most of my projects are on YouTube under Save It for Parts, and that's all one word. I do have a website as well, saveitforparts.com, with a few of my older projects, and then I try to get my videos on there, but I'm not very good about linking the latest videos to the website. So pretty much all my recent stuff is on YouTube. I would say that'd be the best place for people to go.
Do you have a way for viewers to support you? Do you have something like a Patreon or something like that?
I do, yeah. I have a Patreon and I have a YouTube membership or whatever they're calling it now, where I try to post. I try to get enough of a backlog where I can have next week's video done a week ahead of time. So if you're a patron, if you're a YouTube channel member, you can see usually next week's video. Sometimes it'll get the schedule will get bumped around, but there's usually some extra content or some early content on there.
Excellent. Well, I would encourage anyone that's listening to this podcast in any medium to go check out Gabe's channel because it is just entertaining from the start to the end. A little inspirational, makes me a little bit envious, especially all of his watercraft, except for the deadlier ones. I would love to take a ride in. And do you have any closing thoughts for the audience?
Uh, well, I just say, yeah, everybody out there should yeah, take a chance to build something, to get out of your comfort zone, to try to make something out of unconventional parts, and don't be afraid to fail because I fail plenty of times, and that's just part of learning and getting new skills.
Yeah, and you can't believe in reduce, reuse, recycle if you're not willing to reuse. So, if anything, you're an environmentalist.
Yeah, I guess I am.
All right. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come onto the podcast. And I really do hope that everyone listening will go and take a look at your channel because I think it's fantastic. And I'm sure my viewers will think so too.
Well, thank you, Dan.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And we'll catch you in the next one.